Good evening. My name is Michael Kirsty. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of Chamber Music. On behalf of Friends of Chamber Music, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's Performance in Context conversation with the Baltimore Consort. I'm joined this evening by consort members Mark Cudek and Larry Lipkis. Founded in 1980 to perform the instrumental music of Shakespeare's time, the Baltimore Consort has explored early English, Scottish, and French popular music, focusing on the relationship between folk and art song and dance. Their interest in the early music of English Scottish heritage has also led them to delve into the rich trove of traditional music preserved in North America. They will be performing this Sunday, January 12th at 3 p.m. at the Performing Arts Center at the University of Albany. They will present a program of songs, dances, and fancies for Shakespeare entitled The Food of Love. Tickets are $35 and available at the door or in advance on our website or by calling 518-971-1581. Children and students are free to attend. Throughout this discussion, if any of our viewers have questions, please type them into the Q&A below and we'll try to work them into the conversation. But we will have some designated time at the end for audience questions. Welcome, Larry and Mark. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
Hi, Michael. Nice to meet you. Nice to be here.
All right. So excited to have you guys. So could you tell us a bit more about the Baltimore Consort? How did you settle on this name, and does it refer to where you were formed or any backstory?
I'm happy to take that one. Consort is an old term that basically in a modern translation would just be a group of musicians or a band. Specifically, consort was used to determine whether an ensemble was made up of like instruments, which would be a whole consort. For example, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass recorders, violas da gamba of different various sizes, all the instruments of the same family. And a broken consort is an ensemble like ours that has musicians who play instruments of different families. So we have a wind player, we have bowed string players, and we have plucked string players in the same ensemble. And this was a very important group in history, the first ensemble of instruments of different families to be composed for. And so consort is a pretty standard early music term for people that know the field. They know that it just means an ensemble, and the name is often preceded by a location like Baltimore, or a library like the Folger Shakespeare Library and the Folger Consort, etc. Could even be a street name like the Waverly Consort. It was named after the street that their director lived on, I believe. We
And
were
Bal-
originally we originally had a much longer name. The group until 1980 was called the Elizabethan Broken Consort of Pro Musica Rara. But when we decided we wanted to start touring, we realized that wouldn't even fit on a business card. So we abbreviated it some, and we broke away from a parent organization, Pro Musica Rara, which is still active in Baltimore.
and the group really started the Peabody Conservatory of Baltimore, so that's why we have Baltimore in front of Consort.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how did you form as a consort? Did you know each other previously? Were you always a fan of chamber music or early music, or how did this come to be?
Well, the group was put together by its founder and original director, Roger Harmon. He was a professor at the Peabody Conservatory. He was the assistant of a very famous guitar teacher, and he was a lutenist and eventually became the lute teacher at Peabody. And he recruited his own students to play the other plucked stringed instruments. He initially played the lute, and then he recruited other students to play the Renaissance flute and the treble and bass violas da gamba. And eventually the students were replaced by professionals, and we branched out on our own. I was the last student to join. I joined in 1980 when we became an independent ensemble.
And I joined in 1984, replacing a member who had passed away. So I'm kind of the rookie of the group, only been playing for 40 years instead of 40.
Larry is still in the hazing period.
But maybe next year I'll get my wings.
And so, if this group was put together by your teacher and professor, when did you make the jump from a student ensemble to the separation and more independent?
Yeah, it was 1980 when we broke off from the parent organization, and our director Roger stopped playing for a period and started managing the group, getting us work on the road and touring, and started talking about the possibility of recording. We hadn't recorded yet. Our first CD, I believe, was recorded in 1989.
And so, when I listen and watch you perform, I notice your ensemble has a captivating and exciting energy. You really appear to be having fun on stage, and it's fantastic to watch. Is this something that you guys rehearse in your practice as a group, or does this come naturally with the territory or the music?
Well, we don't rehearse to have, we don't practice having fun while we rehearse. It just kind of comes naturally because, we've known each other all these years. We're good friends. We feel like we're a family. We've watched our kids grow up. We have a similar sense of humor. So it just feels very, very comfortable to be in the group. And naturally, we just have fun because mainly the music speaks to us. We kind of we make the experience of playing expressively at the key of the heart of what we do. So that involves interacting, looking at each other, smiling at each other. It just comes naturally. We don't think about, now let's smile a little more on this piece or let's do this. It just really comes with the territory of the music. Sometimes the pieces are doleful, laments, and of course there we are responding to the text. The texts or the nature of the instrumental pieces kind of dictates how we approach them, how we interact with one another.
And as an early music group, was early music always something you were drawn to as a student from the beginning, or did you stumble upon it in Roger's class?
I think we'll all have different answers to that, but I was exposed to it at SUNY Buffalo as an undergrad music major. I was a classical guitar major, and by the time I finished my undergraduate degree, the music I enjoyed playing the most was music for Renaissance lute that was transcribed for guitar, or pieces by myself transcribed. And then it was just a question of eventually getting my hands on a lute, which I did in my senior year of college. And then it wasn't much of an instrument, but at least it got me started on it. And then when I graduated, I moved to Baltimore to work with the teachers at Peabody. Initially the guitar teacher, but then as I got more and more serious about the lute, I worked with his assistant, Roger Harmon, who was the founder of this ensemble.
And I really didn't have much experience with early music in high school, but I received a recorder as a graduation present from my brother, and I just kind of played Peter, Paul, and Mary tunes on it. And then I attended UCLA and went to a Collegium Musicum concert. That's kind of a generic name for an early music group. And I saw, gee, other people are playing recorder, my instrument, and there are other sizes of it. And the music was really cool. So I just joined the group, stayed with it, and then took off into a splinter group with 3 friends. We called ourselves the Earl's Court Players. And we did concerts and weddings and bar mitzvahs and so on. Then I moved to Pennsylvania to go to graduate school. I met Anne Ballard, who was the director of the Penn Collegium Musicum. So I joined that group. So we became friends. That was probably 5 or so years before I joined the Baltimore Consort. So it was a process. It didn't supersede my love of other music, because I'm a composer, so I live in the world of classical contemporary music as well. But early music does have a very special place in my heart and my brain, I guess you would say.
And so as a historical performance group specializing in early music, how do you research the music you perform? What sources or methods do you rely on to ensure accuracy in your interpretations?
Well, there are a number of things. We spend time in the library, not as much these days as we used to many, many years ago, because there are terrific collections. There's probably by now 100 volumes of music of Spain, the monuments of Spanish music, and most of those are from the Renaissance and Baroque. The same thing exists for England, the British Isles, and the Musica Britannica collection. They're just enormous volumes. There's one volume alone dedicated just to the music of Scotland. We did a lot of perusing of that and playing through tunes from that collection. We also hear things. I'm an avid CD collector, and any group that I haven't heard of, if I see a recording, if there's anything remotely interesting about it, I will buy it and listen to it. And I've learned a lot of repertoire just from listening. Marianne was a musicologist, and I think she was maybe a grad assistant at Penn doing her doctorate. And she's got a very, very strong background in musicology. So she's done lots of library work for us, putting together programs. We've all put programs together. Larry and I are speaking to you because we're the ones that put this particular program together.
Marianne, I will say, has a great library of her own in her home in South Bend and also in the apartment in New York. So sometimes when we're there, I will just peruse that to find some source material as well. Mark's right. Libraries have been the main source. The Penn Library is a really wonderful. University of Pennsylvania has a great collection of complete works of various composers and collections, like Mark mentioned, of Musica Britannica. There are a lot of lute sources for solo lute. The lute had like 40,000 pieces in its repertory in the Renaissance, and some of those we've looked at. We've made arrangements from the lute pieces to make them full consort pieces. So a big variety of sources, I would say.
And to what extent do you aim for historical accuracy in your interpretations, and where do you feel that you have artistic freedom from these sources?
We feel we have a lot of artistic freedom, and what we're trying to do is to capture the spirit of the age in which this music was performed. We're not that concerned whether or not it's exactly the way it was performed, because no one really knows. A lot of what we're doing is popular music at the time. It was highly improvised. It was passed down in the oral tradition. So the tunes were eventually written down, and there are written down arrangements of some of them for our specific ensemble. We can get into that a little later, maybe. But it's really hard to say exactly how this music was performed. So we take a certain amount of liberty. We know improvisation was commonly used back then, so we use a little of that ourselves, mostly in rehearsal, working out things, just trying stuff. Some in performance, and you'll see certain smiles of certain members of the group when something happens we haven't heard before.
And giggles.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Mark's right. We do most of our improvising probably in the rehearsal process. We'll try out some counter melodies. Oh, that didn't work so well. So we work to get what we want, and then it kind of becomes fixed. But there are some dance movements in particular where we might have a little bit of improv just for fun, kind of to have variety, but also to surprise our fellow consort members in a pleasant way, hopefully in a pleasant way.
So you mentioned improvisation, which is something I wanted to talk about. Could you tell us more about the improvisation of the time? Is there documentation of musicians from the early Baroque and Renaissance improvising?
Yeah, there are treatises on improvisation. It's not called improvisation, it's called ornamentation. But if you look at the treatises, it's very clearly teaching you how to take one bit of a melody and transform it several ways. I'm studying the viola da gamba pretty seriously now. I just retired from teaching at Peabody, so I've got some time on my hands, and I'm spending a lot of time in a book by Diego Ortiz, which is a very, very important book on improvisation. And it is so highly organized. The whole first book is just, as I said earlier, little melodic patterns, 2, 3, 4, 5 note patterns, followed by 20 to 30 different ways that you can play those same patterns. It's like a rock guitarist going to the corner music store and learning licks. It's
Mhm.
exactly like that. But then the book takes it a few steps further. The second book is examples of written out improvisations that are free and not based on anything, and then a couple of written out improvisations on the various lines of both an Italian madrigal and a French chanson. And then, I'm sorry, before that, there are several improvisations written over a melody, a very popular anonymous melody called La Spagna. And I think there are six, they're called recercatas, written out improvisations with the notes of the melody below at equal long note values. And this was the way they improvised in the 15th century. And then after the chanson and the madrigal, you have a set of 8 recercatas over recurring chord progressions, very similar to what you would do with a 12-bar blues. So
So
there's
another example of that would be from the Netherlands. Jacob van Eyck wrote a 3-volume set called in English, the Flute's Pleasure Gardens. And here he would take popular tunes or psalm tunes and write variations upon them. And so we look at those and to figure out how people would make variations over melodic material or over chord progressions, as Mark said, which we call continuous variations, like the Ortiz ones. But with Van Eyck, that's a really good source for wind players. Well, actually, anyone can play them. They were written for the flute. Van Eyck was a carillonneur. He played the carillon. He was blind, so people would play tunes for him, and then he would play these variations, and friends would write them down in this collection. But it's a really wonderful source to see how you can take something simple and embellish it. So they feel improvised. And they get increasingly faster. The note values get faster and faster, so you can stop wherever you want. But that clearly came out of improvisation, and now it's written down for us to enjoy and build our own improvisations on.
This is really the research that you referred to earlier. This is the research that we do in studying these treatises and examples of how to transform a melody. But there's also a hugely important publication on how to arrange a popular tune for the ensemble. Thomas Morley published in 1599, and it was published a second edition in 1611, the first book of consort lessons. And this is music for our ensemble, the broken consort, a wind instrument, 2 bowed stringed instruments, and in this case, 3 plucked stringed instruments. We're down to 2. We used to tour with 7 people. We're touring with 6 people now. Part of that is just the one instrument we're leaving out, the bandora, is very large. It's an octave below the bass viol. It's hard to transport it, and it's also easier to have a calendar meeting with 6 people than 7. So, but anyway, we try to emulate the musicians for whom Thomas Morley published this. This would be the London Waits, the professional musicians employed by the mayor of London. These are civil servants, musicians who they just wait on the mayor for when he needs them to entertain visiting dignitaries or to do other functions musically. And the repertory is almost exclusively arrangements of popular tunes and dances. There are a few original compositions that would be very, very high art music for this ensemble, but the bulk of it are tunes and dances. Some of the tunes were used by Shakespeare. One in particular, "O Mistress Mine," will be performing on Sunday. So yeah, there are examples from the period written down on how to arrange, what types of sonorities work best, and the types of ornamentation referred to back then as divisions or diminutions.
Mhm.
The Morley Consort lessons, the lute plays a dual role, along with the cittern, which I play. We play chords on the first time through a strain of music, and then the strains always have a repeat. And on the repeat, the lute does a pretty wild set of diminutions, and these have survived. They weren't in the original publication. They were left up to the lutenist to improvise, but there are several written out versions that were set down into lute notation.
And of course, this lasted, into the Baroque period, where you have, on a repeat of a section, you have ornaments that are expected, or a da capo aria on the repeat of the A section. You would expect the singer to do ornamentation, either improvise or just do some kind of division work, as Ron said, to make it special, make it more interesting and exciting for the listeners. So we use basically the Morley Consort lessons that's our chief source of inspiration. We sometimes will take a single melody and turn it into a broken consort piece involving everybody.
It almost sounds like we're talking about jazz here. Do you think about jazz improvisation when you are studying these ornamentations?
Very similar to a jazz combo. Mark alluded to that earlier. He's absolutely right. Same kind of balance with melodic instruments versus chords, and sometimes we add percussion of our own by strumming the bass viol. So we do have it is quite similar. So the structure is obviously different from a jazz tune, a jazz standard, but the spirit is there. And I think, Mark's background as a cafe guitarist, and Ron had a background as a lutenist. I played some klezmer music, which is kind of Jewish jazz. So
Ron's background is as a rock guitarist,
rock, what did I say?
lutenist.
Rock guitarist. Yes.
Yeah.
So those backgrounds sort of help inform our arrangements.
So you work with source material and for all of your music, and you also use source instruments. Could you tell us a bit more about the specific instruments you use in your performances?
Well, the ensemble is, as I said, a wind instrument, and Mindy plays various Renaissance and Baroque flutes, fifes, and whistles. She also plays bagpipes for a certain folkier rep. But it was a Renaissance flute, two bowed strings, a treble, and a bass viol. These would be equivalent today to a violin and a cello, but they're from a completely different family of instruments. The gambas have 6 strings like a guitar, or like the lute has 6 principal courses in the 16th century anyway, and it's tuned exactly like a lute, has frets, except it's played with a bow. And then the plucked instruments, the lute is the most important instrument of the era. Over 2/3 of all published music, instrumental music, was music for the lute. So its repertoire is twice the size of all other instruments combined in the 16th century. It was just enormously popular. And then I play the cittern, which is a wire-strung instrument, kind of like a Renaissance banjo. And so these are the instruments. We are all playing copies of historical instruments. My cittern is a copy of an instrument that's in a museum in Germany. It was built in Germany in 1582, but I'm playing a copy. The plucked stringed instruments the soundboards are made of paper-thin woods, so they don't last over the centuries. The bowed strings, like violins, cellos, and even a lot of gambas, violas da gamba, have survived. And Marianne does have a couple of original antique instruments. But we travel with copies of historical instruments.
And Mark and I play multiple instruments. Marianne plays all three sizes of the viola da gamba in a concert typically. So we can add the tenor to tenor viola da gamba and have a trio of sustained string sounds if we want. So we can also play with three winds because Mark plays winds as well as I do. Typically recorders for special.
I don't play as well as you do.
Well,
But thank you.
but you do play. Uh, and then we have some specialty instruments that I play on a few pieces. Just add a little different color. The Gems horn, which happens to be right next to me. So this is an example of it's actually the horn of a wild goat, and it's in multiple sizes. That's a tenor, so you'll hear that in one piece. We also have crumb horns, which are double reed instruments with a capped reed. So three of us can play the crumb horn, so we will occasionally do that in a piece to add color. Off in our Christmas program, we'll have crumb horns. We're using three crumb horns in the final piece in the program up on Sunday. So those are just basically to add some
Two crumb horns.
two crumb horns.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we do. I think when we get to Good King Wenceslas in the Christmas program, we have three crumb horns. So occasionally we do. Mark is coerced into playing crumb horn for us. And then, of course, the recorder. Here's a soprano. I'll be playing that. So the recorder too has many different sizes. So all the Renaissance instruments have multiple sizes. And the wind instruments, by the way, also exist as organ stops. So you can find a Gemshorn stop on an organ, a Crumhorn stop, a block float, which is the recorder. At my own school where I teach, we actually have a consort of Gemshorns, a soprano, alto, tenor, bass, which is really a lovely sound. A little limited in range, but it's still a beautiful sonority. So Mark's getting his citern, so you can see that.
Yeah, I don't want to be overdone by Larry here. So this is my instrument. It's, I don't know how it has 4 courses of strings, a lovely rosette in the middle, as all plucked stringed instruments have. And this instrument has the distinction of appearing in woodcuts from Elizabethan England, showing it hanging on the walls of barber shops. So it's a kind of a folk-like instrument. It's ideal for accompanying simple ballad tunes. It only works in a couple of keys. At least it works well in a couple of keys because it has a very unusual tuning. It's a reentrant tuning, starting with a B, descending a major third to G, and then ascending a perfect fifth. And then for some strange reason that I honestly don't know, ascending a whole step from D to E. And that makes chord fingering is very, very unusual, different from a guitar. Originally, there was a descending whole step, perfect fifth, ascending whole step, because they loved symmetry. But then that changed, and then the English and French changed it to a third rather than a second, which helps a little bit. And it's got a very
it's not really coming out, Mark, on the
banjo-like tone quality.
We're so forward to hearing that in concert soon. I wanted to ask about some broader trends and challenges that you notice as a leading ensemble of early music. What are some effective ways you found to engage younger audiences with early music, and especially in a world dominated by contemporary genres?
That's a good question, and I think all groups have that concern. We all want to try to reach young people. We really like doing outreach programs with everyone from kids from kindergarten on up through high school and college. So we try to arrange when we're out on a tour. We look forward to some kind of program that will be engaging to the students. We can also, when we do that, we often do a demonstration of a Renaissance dance, bring the kids up to the stage, and I will teach them a simple, maybe an English country dance or possibly a pavane or a galliard. So that can be multi-generational because it's fun to see, grandchildren, grandparents are dancing together up on stage doing a simple Renaissance dance. Um, I've taught some students, high school students, how to write variations over chord progressions, which Mark had mentioned, like a chaconne. So, for example, we were out in Seattle maybe about a dozen years ago, and I hooked up with um, a a viol teacher there, viol de gamma teacher who had a wonderful ensemble of young kids, and we worked out kind of through the Zoom. We started this conversation. We just um, talked about how we could engage these young people in writing their own variations and playing them. So I sent out some music, and then when we were out there in Seattle, I worked with the kids a little bit. And here at home in Bethlehem, I do a chaconne project with the Bach choir. So I get middle school, high school kids to write variations over Bach's chaconne in D minor for solo violin. And so that's a way of engaging young people who are creative and want and like this experience of creating their own music over something that is pre-existing. That's how we can engage them. So it's a constant challenge, I think, to find things that will be appealing to youngsters. But we feel quite passionate about it. We really like to engage children, adults. At Albany, as you know, we're actually working with some faculty poets, and we're very excited about this. That's a kind of outreach, not with young people, but it could be. We could copy this idea and do it with young poets in K through 12, and they can listen to our music as the Albany poets have done, and then write their own poetry to the music, and we can collaborate in ways like that.
I spent over 3 decades spending my summers in northern Michigan at the Interlochen Arts Camp. And I had a program called Shakespeare's Music originally, and then eventually an early music ensemble where high school kids came to major for the summer in early music. And we would occasionally be the pit band for a Shakespeare play that the drama department would do, and the kids would do it on period instruments from memory and costume on stage with their actor colleagues. And it was really wonderful. And a lot of the kids from that program are now professional early music performers in the field.
What advice would you give to aspiring musicians interested in pursuing a career in historical performance?
Well, the only practical thing to do is to do it as an ensemble. I mean, there's not a lot of demand for soloists, and what I tell my advanced students in the historical in the what I used to tell my advanced students in the historical performance department at Peabody is if you end up playing with someone that you really hit it off with musically and you enjoy each other's company, stay in touch, try to keep playing together. Don't let that die away because it's a very, very special thing. And if you can maintain a connection, then each of you might play with one other person independently and have a similar experience. And at this point, you've got a quartet, and you've got a viable ensemble, depending on the instruments and voices, and play with people that you love playing with. And that's a very, very easy way to stay truly dedicated to it. It's worked for us for over 4 decades now.
Yeah. And violinists who go through the Suzuki method, they come across Bach right at the outset in book 1, book 2, and it's filled with Baroque music. A lot of kids, like my own daughter, kind of gravitate to that type of writing. They play it a lot. But Mark is right. It's hard to be a soloist. It's best to find maybe a keyboard player, keyboard and cellist, so you can play Baroque sonatas. You build a little ensemble of like-minded friends who want to explore this repertory. So that's how we would recommend people to do it. Enjoy the music, play it, get really good at it, and then find some friends to join you.
So your weekend here in Albany, we will have two possible times to interact with you in two different performances. One is Harmonious Works, which is a collaborative presentation between poetry and music, and the next will be your formal chamber concert, The Food of Love, featuring songs, dances, fancies for Shakespeare. I was hoping you could tell us a bit more about this program, The Food of Love. How did this come to be?
Well, we've been performing music from Shakespeare in England since the very beginning, because of the formation of the ensemble to recreate the repertoire of Thomas Morley's first book of consort lessons. Those musicians would be the type of musicians that might appear in Shakespeare's pit band from time to time. There's very little documentation on this, but I'm pretty sure that his musicians changed from night to night depending on who was available. And there was definitely a lot of improvisation. And I'm getting a little bit off topic here. You asked me about this particular program, right? I guess I'm on topic. Anyway, there's a tremendous amount of music in Shakespeare. There are actual songs, and the lyrics of these songs are embedded into the text of the play. Many of them, the lyrics are by Shakespeare, but there are many other songs that he brings in who are by other composers who are earlier than him, and he incorporates them into the text. Most of the songs, you don't know what the melody is because there's no notation at all. The stage directions are incredibly vague. You might have something like music here, or a fanfare here, or music for dancing, and that's it. So you have to bring in a certain amount of creativity in bringing this off. But there are specific songs from the play, and we know about there's tons of incidental music. We just don't know what the music was. And we can take a reasonably educated guess on some of the music he might have used, depending on the mood of the scene. So we're presenting some tunes in the concert on Sunday that were not ever mentioned in the play by Shakespeare to be performed, but they were mentioned in the text of the play. For example, we're doing a piece called Bonnie Sweet Robin. It's one of the mad songs Ophelia sings. I'm doing a little solo called Peg a Ramsey, and it's from the Act 2 of Twelfth Night, the revelry scene, where Toby Belch calls Malvolio a Peg a Ramsey. It's evidently an insult, probably a racist insult, because it was an Irish tune, and he's probably referring to him as Irish. So there are all kinds of references to music, the incidental music and actual songs from the play. We don't know the specific songs, except in the case of his last play, The Tempest, or he was documented to have a composer in residence or a collaborator, Robert Johnson, who wrote the songs Full Fathom 5 and Where the Bee Sucks that we are performing. So those were definitely used in the very first performances of Tempest.
And It Was a Lover in His Last is, of course, a very famous one from As You Like It, where we know that Thomas Morley, who was a contemporary, wrote the song, and the text is right there in the play. And that's one of the comic moments. So there are a number of very lighthearted moments. It's not a dull, dreary, sad kind of program. It's very lively and sprightly, and we've chosen texts that, with some exceptions, are very buoyant and full of life. And we put our heart and souls and minds into supporting the text and making the arrangement meaningful to the expression. Everything we do is in service of expressivity, you could say, to be expressive to the text or to the spirit of the instrumental music.
And some of Shakespeare's songs are quite cryptic, but also they're playful. How do you handle this in terms of musical interpretation? Are there certain ways you try to capture the wit or the mystery in some of these pieces?
Yeah, there is a lot. There's some. We have a couple of songs that you might call maybe PG-17. perhaps slightly bawdy. There's one that comes to mind, which is kind of fun, is Carmen's Whistle, which we get from Henry IV, Part 2, a reference to that. And that's a song about a young girl who has a romantic relationship with a carman. And I won't go into details, but there's a point where the young girl becomes melancholic. So we take the melody and just switch it to minor, and the melody fits both a major and minor. And then she cheers up again, and we go back to the major. That's one way we can bring out the meaning. Another example, which is from Romeo and Juliet, we're doing several pieces from the scene in Romeo and Juliet, which is often not performed because it's a little bit, a lot of directors feel it's a kind of incongruity. It's at the point where Juliet has taken the potion and she is feigning, she's feigning death. And that's a very tragic moment. You know, the audience is very quiet. And Shakespeare has written a rather comic and somewhat lengthy interlude there for Peter, who's a servant of the Capulet household, and the musicians. And they have a lot of bantering back and forth and puns. And some modern directors are a little uncomfortable with that because I think audiences will be a little confused by the mix of the tragedy and the comedy. But there are several other examples in Shakespeare where evidently audiences didn't mind that or that they actually liked it. So at one point, Peter says, "My heart is full of woe." And we are doing a song called "Complain My Lute." He also does play Heart's Ease, which is the name of actually two tunes from the Renaissance that are called Heart's Ease. We're taking one of them, and we found a broadside ballad, which is not known. We don't know who composed it, but it uses, it's based on the tune Heart's Ease. And it tells a story of a young girl who is complaining to her lute about her lover who seems not to appear on time when she's expecting him. He does show up eventually, and they have a romantic interlude. We kind of play into that. We've arranged it so that the viol kind of Yodagama represents the woman. When the guy comes in, the flute kind of takes over and does counter melodies, and they have a passionate evening together. We have an interlude after that, which kind of replicates musically what we feel might be going on in the young woman's bed. And then he says, "Oh, sorry, got to run." Doesn't really look at his watch, but he says, "Sorry, I think I've stayed too long." And so she goes back to complaining to her lute about this inconstant young gentleman. This evidently happened quite a bit in the Renaissance. Never happens these days, of course, but we've gotten way past that. But anyway, we adapt our music to fit that particular story, that line, which really comes out of the play, out of a very tragic moment in the play we've developed. We have several pieces from that very scene that Peter mentions. And actually the text of a song, "When Griping Grief," by a composer named Richard Edwards, who composed this song before Shakespeare's time. So we perform that as well. So, and that really is appropriate to the tragedy, because Peter's reacting to what he thinks is Juliet's death. And it's a lovely, lovely song, very heartfelt, one of the most tear-jerking songs, I think, in the whole Shakespeare canon. So I'm not sure where, I forgot now what your question was, but maybe we've got off on a tangent. But if we're talking about, expressivity, how we shape this show and what choices we make, that's a good example. I'm sure Mark has some of his own too, which he could help us with. But just ways that we take a text and work with it with our own instruments to kind of bring it to life.
Yeah, there are a number of things. We alter tempi depending on what the text is about. Articulation, we might use a lot of very short articulations if something is comic, and play much more legato if something is sad. We can vary our instrumentation because we have such strong players and a few of us who play multiple instruments. So we have a lot of room for different timbres. So we can adjust the timbre and do some kind of special effects occasionally. For example, the song Larry mentioned in Romeo and Juliet, When Griping Grief, we do that, or I accompany the first verse alone by plucking chords on the bass viol instead of bowing it. So it's like all of a sudden we have like a bass lute accompanying instead of a normal lute, and then Ron joins me, and we have this very lush sound of plucked strings. If I were to use the cittern with the wire stringing, it would be a much lighter effect. So I save that for dancier pieces of a lighter mood. So the cittern features prominently in Carmen's Whistle. The Carmen, by the way, was a huckster, someone who walked the streets with a horse-drawn cart or car and sold his wares. And there are all kinds of gossipy stories about them, seeking out the housewives who were alone at home and engaging with them. So that's kind of what the Carmen's Whistle is about. Great, great tune and a really fun song. The text, though, is not easy. There's a lot of archaic expressions. So I hope the audience has the text and will read it and follow along and get some of the jokes, because a lot of times we don't hear laughter where we really expect it.
Oh man. And you'll also be joined by Danielle Svonavec. How
Yes.
long have you always worked with singers previously, and how long have you worked with Danielle?
Yes, we definitely, the singer is crucial for our ensemble. And Danielle's been with us for 25 years now. She came in on, I think, about a 36-hour notice when our singer Custer LaRue got ill and couldn't do a tour with us. Danielle showed up. I think she was still an undergrad. I think she was a senior at Notre Dame. And she was, I believe, a math major. She took voice lessons, and Mary Ann's husband, Alex Blatchley, is the choral director at Notre Dame, and she was one of his students. And Mary Ann knew of her and knew that she could do it. And boy, she came in and was just terrific, and has only gotten better with every year. So it's a real thrill to be working with Danielle. She really can bring these texts to life.
On that topic, that song I mentioned, Complain My Lute, Danielle it's a ballad with three characters. There's a narrator, the guy, and the girl. So Danielle has three different voices or three different ways of expressing the characters. It's very, very funny. If you're following the story, she really can carry that off beautifully.
Yeah, and she does a song called the Gravedigger Song from Hamlet. And she does that down an octave in tenor range and belts it out like a man. It's pretty funny.
Yep.
Oh man, well we are so excited to share this program with our audiences. I wanted to switch gears, and one question that we love to ask our seasoned artists is, what is your earliest musical memory? And from that point, was it a steady road to where you were today? Were there bumps along the way?
Well, my earliest musical memory is probably in elementary school hearing, I think his name was Mason Williams, playing a tune called Classical Gas.
Yep,
It
I
was
remember that.
an acoustic guitar solo at a time when you weren't really hearing guitar solos on the radio. It was all songs. And I mean, I was a fanatic follower of the Beatles, saw them live. But when I heard this solo guitar piece by Mason Williams, it just, wow, is that something I could do? I'd been studying rock guitar, playing in a rock group in elementary school, and switched over and started playing with my fingers instead of a pick all the time, and gradually morphed into classical guitar, which gradually morphed into the lute.
Yeah, I think we all have different stories. My earliest memory would be my mother sitting at the piano playing folk tunes out of a book of American folk tunes by Ruth Crawford Seeger, who was actually an avant-garde composer by day, and no, not by day, but she also followed her husband Charles around, who's an ethnomusicologist and collected a lot of Appalachian ballads and other folk songs. So she sang, my mother sang these songs and played the piano, and I was just so taken by those. I learned piano probably because of that. And then after a while, I switched over to clarinet, and then onto the early music scene. But my earliest memories would probably be those, just hearing my mother sing songs and accompanying them by herself at the piano.
Wow. I just want to leave a few minutes for any of our audience. If you have a question, please feel free to type it into the Q&A, and we will make sure to answer that now. And for Mark and Larry, do you have any other hidden talents outside of your music making activities?
Outside of music, well, I have a very strong athletic background. I went to college on a track and cross country scholarship and got into music more seriously because of an Achilles tendon injury. So that happened to me early in my college career, but I've kept active with it, not so much in my 70s, but in my 40s and 50s. I did triathlon. I ran a bunch of marathons, managed to break 3 hours in the marathon, and continue to ride my bike as much as possible today. Not today because we have 5 inches of snow that fell, but I get out pretty regularly, and when I can't ride outside, I have no, I guess you can't see it. Have a trainer there. I guess it's too far away to see it, but try to keep in shape.
And I get my exercises by deleting emails. No, I'm not nearly as athletic as Mark, but I do like to take walks and bicycle. And I like to read. I'm in a book club, and so more sedentary. But within music, I'm also a composer. I'm a composer in residence at Moravian University, and I certainly enjoy teaching because I've been there for close to 50 years now. So I feel my musical life is kind of triangulated between composing, early music performance, and teaching music, orchestration, form, 20th century music, etc.
Amazing. We have a few questions coming in. Is your experience with early music mostly with Elizabethan European origins, or do you perform early music from other cultures?
The ensemble is primarily a group that does European music, but we have explored Appalachian music. Some of the old ballads traveled with the Pilgrims to this country, and musicologists have traveled through the Appalachian region with tape recorders, collecting these ballads that can trace their lineage back to Elizabethan England. But so there's some work with that we've done work with American traditional music and some Canadian traditional music. I myself have done a lot of work with my Peabody students, doing Music of Three Faiths program, doing Sephardic music and Arabic music, as well as Christian Catholic music from the Middle Ages.
And there's some interesting Baroque music from Latin America. We've done a little bit of that. I know, Mark, you've done a program and then I've done that as well. So, yeah, but as Mark says, we're primarily Western European based in our repertory.
And another question from Brian, are there any plans for new recordings in the future?
There are always plans.
Right.
It's a lot harder these days. When we recorded for Dorian and came up to Troy, the Savings Bank, the projects were funded. We didn't make money off of them, but we had our expenses paid, and the recording engineers were supplied by the company. Now you have to hire them. You have to rent a hall or a recording studio. I feel terrible for young musicians because fortunately they have YouTube. They can record themselves more easily, but the effort it involved in putting out a compact disc is just phenomenal, and the expense is just overwhelming.
I will say one thing we enjoy, and this is thanks to Mark's initiative. We've done 2 programs now involving collaborations with readers, speakers. So we have the Angels in Angels Weed program, which is music from the time of Mary, Queen of Scots. And we have a reader, Robert Aubrey Davis, who reads quotations that are appropriate to the life of Mary, and we play music appropriate to the time, kind of go through her life chronologically from France back to Scotland. And then we've also done a Spanish program, The Secret Music of Tordesillas, where we focus on music from the age of Ferdinand and Isabella, Joan the Mad. And that involves an author joining us. So I actually would love to do more of that kind of collaboration. That's why I got very excited about this poetry collaboration with the Albany poets. I think maybe that could lead to something, even if it doesn't. The idea of collaborating with literary sources is very good. If we go in any direction, that's the direction I like to go into.
Yeah, the secret music at Tordesillas would appeal to your authors. It was written by Marjorie Sandor, and it's just an exquisitely beautiful book. I've read it 5 times now, and Marjorie and I got together and put a script together. I mean, it's all her writing, but we talked about it together, working it out and picking out Spanish music that would be appropriate for it. It was immense fun.
And we have one last question. Have you ever been recruited to play live music for a professional production for an extended engagement?
A professional production, like a Shakespeare play, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Hmm.
We wish it would be lovely, but it's when you have 6 different musicians that live in 4, or at one point it was 5 different states, getting us together in one place for a length of time is very difficult. Plus, I don't know any institutions that have the budget to have professional musicians on a regular basis like that. It's sad. I wish it could happen, because we have collaborated with actors in the Baltimore Shakespeare Festival, Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival, the Indiana Repertory Theater. We've done individual one-off programs with actors recreating scenes, and we provide the music. But doing an entire play is, Larry and I have both been music director to Shakespeare plays, and it's enormously satisfying. It's really, really fun. But
But
you only
it's
really do it
very,
with students.
it's so time consuming, as Mark says, because the play goes on for, at least at a festival, many, many weeks. It's just hard for a group like ours to give that kind of time, and it would be very, very expensive.
Yeah.
The Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival, that's actually where we premiered The Food of Love. I think it's 2014 or around then. But they would love to have us back to do more, but I think their budget will be limited, and we can come back and do another one-off concert, but not to do an entire run of a show.
Yeah.
To do.
So our last question this evening that we like to ask all of our seasoned artists is, what do you think the role is of an artist in today's world? Is this something that you reflect on for yourselves, such as what is my role in the world, or what are my goals as an artist citizen?
I think all of our goals have to do with creating beauty and sharing it, putting it out into the world, because the world certainly needs it.
Inspiring people, engaging them, entertaining them, giving them something beautiful. That's what we're doing.
Amazing. Well, Mark and Larry, thank you so much for joining me this evening. We so look forward to having you this weekend, and we hope to connect with you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
Right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.